This is Wunghnu Cemetery, a part of Numurkah Wunghnu Trust, and about 2.5 hours from Melbourne. There is not a lot to say about Owen. He died of a long-running illness. John moved to the area in 1884 and stayed on that farm until he died in 1916. The only interesting thing I could find about Hugh is his obituary, or more to the point, the line, "To live in heart we leave behind, in not to die." And while we are on a odd language note, check out the line on this headstone, "Who fell asleep in Jesus." Look man, I don't know what you do in your bedroom, but it's still none of my business. As you might have guessed, I spend too much time in cemeteries. And every now and then it leads me to start thinking about original burial grounds, or what the hell they did back in the Stone Ages. So I thought that I might just look into it, and then explain it back to you in this video. Or at least the starts of it, because it turns out that the whole dying thing and burying thing is quite an in-depth topic. Who knew? You might be surprised to find out that, in fact, people have been burying loved ones since the Paleolithic period, the Stone Age, in other words. Although the burials in the Stone Age didn't come with quite the same pomp and ceremony as burials today, it is still speculated that there was some aspects that could be seen as ceremonious. Some were buried with their tools or jewellery, usually made out of bone or stone. Many of the bodies were covered in ochre, or the graves sprinkled with ochre as the bodies were covered with the earth. Side note, ochre is a type of rock which is ground up. Usually comes in red, and red is what it's known for. However, it has a full colour spectrum of yellows, oranges, reds and browns. It's what they used with the cave paintings of old. The ochre, to some extent, had been also used as a bit of a marker so people didn't accidentally dig up the same ground that a body was already in. These graves were shallow and about a foot or so in depth. This really come down to the lack of suitable tools. It's not like they could go down the street and buy a new shovel after all. It's important to note that not everyone got one of these burials where they were laid out quite nice and with their tools, etc. Sometimes they were just sort of tossed in the ground or rolled in, and other times people weren't even buried at all, or in mass graves, depending on the circumstance and the times. Because you have to remember how hard those times were. It wasn't necessarily easy to bury a loved one. In the Neolithic period, burial mounds became more of a thing. Side note, Neolithic is still Stone Age, but this is when farming and settlements started to become a thing. So it's just before the Bronze Age. So with these settlements came more of a social order, which brought about more ritual and culture. So burial mounds were essentially rather large, somewhat straight rocks where they could build somewhat of a room out of, or many rooms depending on what type of burial mound it was, surprisingly, and then they'd cover them with dirt. So somewhat like a tomb. And this would house either the bodies or the bones, depending on the particular culture at hand. And it was pretty common for them to move around these bodies and these bones, almost like they were circulating them for some unknown reason. Some archaeologists argue that it was to do with social bonding, that somehow you could join the clans together by putting the bodies next to each other or the bones next to each other. I don't know if that's true. Seems a little bit like speculation to me. So, if you enjoyed Stone Age burials and you want to know what happens in the Bronze Age, best to check out the next video.